I want to talk about MDX. As I've been working with it more and more over the last few years, I've seen and used some really cool web development patterns that I wanted to share with the world. So let's get right into it. This is the MDX app. First of all, what is MDX? I am, of course, talking about my dad's Xbox. Nah, I'm just kidding. You've probably heard of or even used Markdown before. Well, MDX is a superset of Markdown, meaning you can do all the things with it that you would normally use Markdown for, plus you can import and render JSX or React components within your documents.
These days, MDX is a common tech choice for things like blogs, documentation, or other Markdown-heavy content formats. Things where you have free-flowing content and interactive components scattered throughout. You typically see things like this: headings, paragraphs, code blocks, and interactive examples. These components can be as sophisticated as you need them to be. You can tap into your favorite React features, make HTTP requests, whatever you want really. The first time that I did anything with MDX that felt different was when I was building the original version of Odyssey, Apollo's learning platform, back in late 2020. We were inspired by a pattern that we saw in a presentation tool called MDX Deck, and decided to author entire courses in a single MDX file, splitting it up into lessons using horizontal rule elements as a divider, and then we would render each page individually. This allowed us to write courses that flowed linearly from start to finish and without context switching between a handful of individual files. It also meant that we could define front matter at the top of the file that would describe the overarching course, and then came up with a novel way to repurpose YAML code blocks within the document to add lesson-specific metadata. I will say, we ended up having to do a lot of extra work to create separate pages for each lesson, but it seemed worth it for us at the time. It was a neat approach, but I don't know that I would recommend it to everyone. In my opinion, one of the most underrated parts about MDX is its layouts feature. It follows a simple rule. MDX files can have exports, and the default export is always considered that document's layout. When an MDX document is rendered, its content is passed as React children to the layout component. This allows you to share UI that your MDX pages have in common, or define custom components to replace the default HTML elements that Markdown gives you. Earlier this year, I rebuilt my personal project, NoWord. NoWord is a word game that teachers use to create custom vocabulary exercises for their students. I've used MDX in NoWord's blog and content pages like privacy policy and terms of use since forever. But this time around, I noticed an opportunity to try something new. Here's what my default MDX page layout looks like. I've got a header, a footer, and a content area. When I was re-implementing my support page, I noticed something. A header, footer, and the same content area. Here's how that page used to be structured. I have a React component with all of these common elements, including headings and paragraphs rendered explicitly with JSX. And then I have this interactive contact form. Now this got me thinking, what if I built my support page using MDX instead of this big clunky React component? I could take care of the common page layout with a single default export, define all my page title and description using front matter, and then write the support page preamble copy using paragraphs in Markdown. That would only leave the interactive contact form. So I'd write only that part using React and drop it into my file like a React component. And it looks and works exactly the same. So what's the difference? Well, besides having fewer lines than its JS counterpart, the MDX implementation looks a lot cleaner. Page configuration lives in one place, the front matter. The page layout is defined by a default export, and the content follows, plain and simple. Finally, the only interactive part of the page is represented by a single JSX element, and I'm even passing the success message of the form component as Markdown children. So quick tip, if you add an empty line before and after the children you pass to a React component in MDX, it'll cause the children to be treated as Markdown, meaning you can pass a Markdown list or inline code or a code block to a React component as children using this technique.
After this, I started to look around at the rest of my codebase and noticed some opportunities for MDXifying other kinds of pages. Suddenly, any collection of pages that shared some common layout became a candidate for refactoring.
Things like the account dashboard with its one shared sidebar among multiple different pages, and the browse this collection type of page with shared filtering and category UI were the next to go the way of MDX. I mean, look at this transformation. I admit, it might look kind of ridiculous at first, but it's grown on me. And if I was using MDX version 2 here, I could combine these two lines, importing and exporting my layout into a single export statement.
Unfortunately, since I'm using Gatsby's MDX implementation for this site, I'll be stuck on MDX v1, at least for the moment. Which brings me to my final point, the plethora of choice and trade-offs in this space.
There are 4 main qualities that I look for when I'm evaluating any framework for building an MDX app. First, it has to let you tap into the framework's own page creation workflow, meaning that if you create an MDX file in your pages directory, a new page will be automatically created for you. You should also have access to all of the data fetching tools that you would normally use, things like a page query in Gatsby or get static props in Next. Secondly, it should support imports. This one may seem obvious, but as a core aspect of the MDX experience, I wouldn't want to go without it. Third, it should support YAML front matter. Not only is YAML front matter a cleaner alternative to exporting a JavaScript object containing your metadata, but having that metadata automatically sent to your page layouts is just an essential feature for any developer. Finally, MDX v2 support would be really nice. It boasts a smaller footprint and supports new syntax like inline JavaScript expressions. Let's start with Gatsby. Their official plugin, Gatsby Plugin MDX, requires very little configuration and checks all the important boxes for me. At the time of recording, MDX version 2 support in Gatsby is still in development, but I've tested out the release candidate and it works really well. And once that drops, it'll be the cherry on top of an already great MDX implementation. You can also have a really solid MDX experience in Next.js. There's just a bit more choice in that space. None of the popular Next.js MDX plugins fully support all of the features that I mentioned earlier, but Next MDX gets really close. There's just one caveat to keep in mind. In MDX version 2, exports are no longer automatically passed as props to your layout components. So in order to pass front matter to your layouts, MDX files in Next.js must export a getStaticProps function that returns the parsed front matter. Luckily, there are Remark plugins that handle this, so you don't need to write the same repetitive getStaticProps function in every file. Unfortunately, that means that if you wanted to write a page with a custom getStaticProps function and consume the return data, you'd be out of luck. Of course, if you don't mind using a named export for your page front matter, you can roll with Next MDX and MDX version 1 and still have a good time. And then there's Astro. Astro provides a fantastic MDX experience via their official plugin. It requires virtually no configuration and lets you benefit from all of the crazy stuff Astro has to offer, like importing .astro files and rendering them in your MDX files. In fact, even without MDX, Astro's default shared layouts and Markdown features provide a similar experience to the MDX patterns I've been going on about this whole time. Another framework that I'm really optimistic about is called Raucous.js. Raucous is still so new that whatever I say about it now is likely to change in future versions, but the current state of MDX support there is about on par with Next.js, so pretty impressive.
We already know that MDX is a fantastic format for authoring content, but it can also be a really powerful tool for simplifying shared layouts in web apps. There are definitely some trade-offs to consider when selecting your MDX tools, but I believe there's a lot to gain by adopting some of the patterns that I've discussed in this video. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this interesting, and if you have any questions about this topic, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Peace.